everyone. Thank you for tuning in today. This is our series number 2 workshop for the ALCA-Seltzer and Indian Lake Public Library workshop series. Today we are learning about worm composting with Indian Lake librarian Susan Rawlings. And I'll let Susan take it over because I know nothing about worms.
Well, happy Earth Day, everybody. I thought it would be a great way to celebrate Earth Day by talking about poop. In particular, I'd like to talk about worm poop. Vermiculture, which is the idea of taking worms, feeding them your food waste, and then those worms will poop the food waste out, and you can use that on your garden. And I think everyone should give this a try because it's super fun. It's pretty easy. Kids love it. It saves you from taking your food scraps to the transfer station, and it benefits your garden quite a lot. I have a little model of an earthworm, and the earthworm will ingest your food. And earthworms have 5 hearts, in case you didn't know that. The food goes into the gizzard, stays there for a little while, and then it goes into the crop. And the crop crushes all the food, and it travels down through the intestines and comes out into your worm bin. Maybe we could do a little close-up of what we're talking about here. The worms are a particular type of earthworm called red wigglers. The scientific name is Eisenia fetida.
Oh my God, there they are. Look at them.
They're there. They're really cool critters.
Oh my God, they're like all over each other.
Yeah, and I'm going to bring them in for a little close-up. These are very, very happy little worms.
Ooh.
They tend to
there's a little tiny one.
Oh yeah, there's all different sizes. There's babies, there's adults, and if you're ever lucky, you can find sometimes the eggs inside your compost, which is really cool.
Oh, they must be really, really tiny.
Yeah, they are. They actually look like pepper seeds. They're like sort of lemon-shaped.
Weird.
And what these guys are producing, for me, is this beautiful, beautiful compost that I'm going to put over my special plants in the gardens.
That can't be all their little poop.
No, this isn't all their little poop. Most of it's their poop. But it was a little bit wet. I like it to be a little bit crumblier, so I add peat moss to my my poop after I harvest it. Let's talk about making a bin. I have a 2-person household, and we eat a lot of vegetables and fruits. And I find that like this little 18-gallon Rubbermaid, well, the generic version of Rubbermaid bin works really well. The only preparation you need to do for your bin is drill some holes in it. And the holes work best if they're about 1/4 inch or so wide. And I do a grid pattern of holes at the bottom because you want to have your compost drain. And then I do a series of holes around the top. And the reason I do them just around the top is I want to have the rest of this filled with worms and with bedding.
All the way up to the...
All the way up to the holes, basically.
Wow.
Because what happens as your food and your bedding decomposes, it shrinks down.
Okay.
So you can just put more stuff on top of it. And then the lid should have holes in it. I think I used this as a demo a couple of years ago when it was the tray, so it doesn't have holes, but always have holes in your lid. And it's kind of a fun drilling project if you have somebody in your family who likes to play with a drill.
Are the holes for the air?
The holes are for the air circulation. The worms don't breathe the way we do, but they breathe through their skin. So it's important that they have good air circulation. It'll also help keep the stinkiness of your garbage down too, because you don't want it to have a anaerobic situation where no oxygen's in there, because things get stinky. Just like stick some old food in a jar and close it up, and then open it in a couple weeks. You'll know why you want to have holes in there. And then I have this old boot tray that I use as the catch-all. What happens sometimes, the bin will drain a little bit, and you can take whatever liquid's on that tray and dilute it with water and pour that on your plants. It's really cool. So I have a few pieces of wood that I use to elevate my bin. Put that on top. And then the bedding, the easiest bedding I find is just ripped up newspaper. I tend to try to stay away from newspaper that has a lot of color in it. I like black and white because that's just carbon. Federal regulations say that you don't have heavy metals and stuff in colored ink anymore, but I just like to play a little safer. So I have taken the time to kind of rip up some newspaper ahead of time. My worm fell. Little strips like this, but I don't want to just toss them in there because they'll just mat on top of one another. So it's really important to crumple it up, and then you're going to wet it. And always crumple first. I found out the hard way the first time I did this. I just threw newspaper in there and threw it in, and it really made a total mess.
Too wet, maybe, or?
It just matted up terribly, and I was trying to pull it apart, and then it rips, and it's just awful. So you want to wet it, and then squeeze it out so it's about the consistency of a wet sponge. And just do that over and over until you have about 6 inches in there. Takes a little while.
Where do you keep your bin?
Oh, good idea. I keep my bin in my mudroom, which is right near my kitchen, so it's pretty handy. Basements are a good place. Garages are a good place for them as well. The big thing that would decide where you want to put your worm bin is convenience and temperature. The worms are sensitive to temperature. The ideal is between 55 and 77 degrees. That seems to be where they're in their happy place. If things are too cold, they will slow down getting rid of your food very quickly. And so your stuff will take much, much longer to decompose. If it gets down to freezing, they'll die. So you don't want to put it out somewhere where they're exposed to freezing temperatures. Likewise, if it gets to be like over 84 degrees, the worms could die because they'll cook. You could keep it outside on your porch. I would just caution that you could run into problems with critters being attracted to the food. I've never done that, and you know, up here we have coyotes and raccoons and all sorts. So to play it safe, I would keep it inside.
What type of food, you talked about the organic matter that you feed the worms.
Oh yeah. Pretty much any kind of vegetable or fruit is really good. You could put bread, you could put pasta in there if you want to. I would steer away from those things if they have a lot of butter or oil, things like that can go rancid. Let's see, what else? Coffee grounds are really good.
I saw eggshells, I think, in your...
Yep, eggshells are really good because the worms need calcium, so they go through the eggshells pretty good. That calcium also translates into your vermicompost that you put on your garden too, so that's a real good thing to have in there. Let's see, grass clippings. I would try to stay away from stuff that has a lot of weeds in them, but if you compost long enough, the weeds will probably not be viable. Pretty much anything that's not overly processed. Food don'ts would be meat, because obviously that could start to get stinky. Alcohol, dairy products, again because of the stinky factor. And citrus fruit does not seem to agree with them very well. Too acidic, I think. And things, I found this out the first summer I did it. I ate a lot of peaches. Anything with a stone fruit, you'll have a lot of pits in there. They don't break down the pits. So avocados, the skins are okay, the flesh is okay, but the pit will just sit there forever. So those are the basic things I wouldn't put in there, along with cupcakes and things with a lot of sugar and frosting and gross stuff. Yeah.
They have to eat healthy too.
They do, yeah. So I crumpled up and moistened a whole bunch of newspaper strips, and I crinkled them up, dumped them in the water, squeezed them out so they're about like a wet sponge. And now we're ready for a few more ingredients for the bedding. And bedding is very, very important because it does a couple of different things. It feeds your worms because they'll eat this stuff as well as your garbage. The additional ingredients are going to help the worms with their digestion. And then also, this newspaper acts as a barrier to the food and the worms and the poop, so that you don't have odors and things like that coming into your house. So it's really important to have a plentiful supply of this and to keep it moist. So in addition to that, I just grabbed this morning, after I shoveled into snow, some sand from my driveway. And then the back of my car, I had a straw bale back there, go figure. So I picked up some straw there, so I'm just gonna dump that stuff. This rock fell in, that's a little too big. But I'll put the sand in there. And the sand again helps the crop grind up the food. And then I went out front and I just grabbed some garden soil. Doesn't take very much, just a handful. And toss that in.
And that's probably been composted through your straw bales, I bet.
Yeah, actually, it had some straw bales on top of it. This is, yeah, some topsoil. Probably has worm poop in there. And then this last bit is just some peat moss that I use because it adds a little bit of fluff to the bedding.
And so you're just layering it? Are you going to mix it up?
I'm going to mix it up. That's the best part to do with kids because when we taught it here at the library, oh my God, kids love doing that because they can just get right down into the bin and mix everything around. And if you let them do it with the newspaper, the wet newspaper, oh my gosh, totally fun. So it doesn't look much different now, but that's what you got for your worms. So the next step will be inserting your worms into the bin. Now, a handy way to do that is if you have a friend who has a very healthy worm population, like me, if that friend is willing to split some of their population to seed you with worms, that's a good way to get them. But you can also get them at bait shops. Some garden stores will have them. I ordered my initial worms through Uncle Jim's Worm Farm. You can find them online.
Jeez.
I know, who thought? And it's in the instructions that'll be on our website too, all the links to places that you can find them. The big important thing is that you want red wigglers. If you get a bunch of earthworms from your garden, it's a different kind of worm, different kind of system. They need to burrow deep into the ground. So those worms are not going to be happy in your bin. You want red wigglers because they're more sort of surface dwellers. They'll kind of mess around in compost piles outside, but they're not going to go way down deep into the soil. It's another reason they don't tend to survive very much up here over the winter if they happen to get out into your garden. So when you get your worms, and mine came in like a little cloth bag, and they looked really sad because they were kind of dehydrated from traveling. What you want to do is get your bin all ready, put your worms inside the bin, and then cover them up. You don't want to feed them right away. They need a little bit of time to adjust and to kind of get used to their new digs.
14 days of sequestering? Or?
No, thank God it's not 14 days. Probably about 24 hours will do it. And then you can start feeding them. And generally, you can order the worms. They'll come like a pound at a time. An or a red wiggler can eat about 3 times its weight in a week. So if you throw a pound of worms in here, you can kind of bet on about 3 pounds of food being digested a week, which doesn't sound like a lot, and it's not, but eventually your population will grow because it'll be happy. And the more worms you have, the more food you can put in there. So I brought my babies with me. I just took a bunch of stuff off the top of my compost. And I showed you a close-up of them here, but you can see, here's a sweet potato, and that didn't quite get digested yet, because we just did it a couple days ago. Potato skins, and when I pull this stuff away, the worms want to burrow down there.
Oh yeah, they're
so fun. I love them. And there's like little bits of sprouts that sprouted in there. I don't know what those are from, but there's an onion skin, lots of worms, and there
Is
they
this
go.
all your worms or just a sample of your worms?
Just a couple scoops. Just a couple scoops. I have a lot of worms in my bin. I'm probably getting ready to divide them at some point again because I want to get to the poop so my garden has it.
Ah.
Yeah. So those guys go in there, cover them up, and they start their life in this bin. And then I would, of course, cover it with a lid with holes. And every time I put food in here, I just pull aside some newspaper, throw the food in, and cover it back up.
Wow.
It's
Pretty
not
easy.
that hard. Yeah, and you can even save your scraps in a bowl all day, and then at the end of the day put them in there, or just do it as you go. It's pretty forgiving. So we can talk about some troubleshooting for your worm bin, because occasionally things happen and you want to know how to deal with them. One of the things that could happen is if you aren't covering up your food scraps really well, or if you just have way too many food scraps, fruit flies could find your bin. And then they find your bin, they're going to be all over your house, which is kind of a pain. So you can go online and order a fancy fruit fly trap, which is ridiculously expensive in my opinion. So what I do is I use apple cider vinegar and a simple little takeout condiment container. And what I do is have a bunch of little holes in the top of the container, and then fill the container part way with apple cider vinegar. It doesn't take very much, maybe just a tablespoon or two. And I cover the container. Give it a little shake so you get a couple drops on the outside of it, because that'll attract any fruit flies that you have. And I just leave it in place, and it basically lives on top of my bin for all the time. And then occasionally, if we get some in the kitchen, I'll put another one of these on the counter. Another thing that could happen, especially during harvest season, you might have an abundance of vegetable scraps. And if you keep feeding them and keep feeding them and keep feeding them to the worms, remember they can only do about 3 times their weight per week. So if you get too many vegetables in there that the worms can't handle, it's going to start to stink in your house. So a couple ways to solve that problem is that you could start another temporary bin, just in like a cardboard box. Take some of your bedding, take some of your worms, put the excess stuff in there, and then don't feed it. And then when everything's gone, you can relocate these guys back into your bin. Another thing that you could do is you could cut up your scraps, put them in baggies and freeze them, save them for later. Then if you go on vacation and you're worried about not feeding your worms, somebody could take care of feeding your worms for you. You can use the scraps that way.
So you need a worm sitter.
You do and you don't. If you're going to be gone for a couple of weeks, you're probably fine. If you're going to be gone for like months at a time, you might want to have somebody check in on them. When they run out of food, they'll eat the bedding. Then when they run out of the bedding, they actually will eat their poop again.
Oh.
Another thing that could happen is if you live in a house like mine that heats exclusively with wood, your bedding can dry out just because the air is so dry in your house. And that's a really simple fix. I just keep a spray bottle with water near my bin, and if I walk by, I'll just open it up and give it a couple squirts. That's pretty much all that could go wrong. Like I said, it's kind of hard to mess this up.
You mentioned runners.
Oh yeah, occasionally you might get a runner because you have holes in the bottom, you got a little tray. I personally have not had this happen since I began doing this, and it only lasted a really short period of time. And I think if you have runners, there might be something going on in your bin, they're just not happy. Maybe it's too wet in there, in which case maybe add some more bedding and kind of fluff things up a little bit. It could be maybe you've put a lot of acidic things in there and the worms are like freaking out because they don't really tend to like too much acid. I would make some observations and look inside your bin and see what's going on there. But another thing that you can do if you're very, very concerned about worms escaping your bin, you could take a piece of window screening and put that down at the bottom of your bin before you put anything else in, and that would keep the worms from going through the holes. I just never did that, and I'm probably not going to bother now. So that's another little fix that you could do. But I guess we should talk next about how to harvest your poop, because it's in the bin, it's lovely, but it needs to get out in your garden. So to harvest your compost, there's a few different ways to do it. I've tried a couple ways, and I'm very happy with the way I do it, which I'll save for last because I think it's the easiest. One thing that you can do is take everything in your bin and sort of squash it all over to one side, and then fill the empty side with more bedding, and have that be the only place you put new food scraps. And then the worms, once they eat all the food over here, they'll figure it out and they'll migrate over to this side of the bin. And presumably what will happen is if they're all over here eating, you have nothing but compost over here. Now, there'll be a few renegades that stick around, not a big deal, but you could take that part of your bin out and use it on your garden, and then just proceed as you have in the past and fill the whole bin again. I don't like using that method just because I feel it cuts off a lot of my usable area for composting, but it's something you could try. The other method is you could simply scoop out half the contents, worms and all, food scraps and all, dump it in your garden and use it as is, and then the rest of the population will, continue to grow and eat your food. I don't use that method because I feel like the worms are not cold hardy up here, so they'll probably live for a little while in the garden and then die, and I feel like, well, I just spent money on those worms too. I don't want them to die. So I don't use that method, but it is perfectly fine to do. The worms won't upset your ecosystem because they won't survive long term. The other thing that you can do is take out everything from your bin, and this is on a beautiful day that's not too hot, not too sunny, but still a nice day, not too cold, somewhere in that 55 to 77 degrees. Put a tarp on the ground and dump everything out on the tarp. And then you would take all of the little piles of poo and take all the poo and make them into little piles like this all over the tarp. And because the worms are very light sensitive, they won't hang out up here. They're going to sink down to the bottom of that pile, and then you can go by and take off the top of the pile. And you can keep doing this and doing this all day.
Oh, jeez.
Reforming the pile, skimming off the top, until all you're left with are a little pile of worms. So that's great if you got a million years to do it. I tried that once. And I'll just say I tried that once, and it's just not my gig. So what I do, when I know I'm ready, and I think I've got a fair amount of compost, like let's say this is my usable area to compost my food. If I'm about halfway up there, that's probably a good sign that I should probably get something going so I can harvest that poop, because I don't want my bin to get so full it covers up the air circulation. So I will get another bin exactly like this. I will prepare it exactly like this. I'll drill holes in the bottom, I'll drill holes around the side, and then I will take the bin and put it right on top of the compost. Now something you could do after you fill the second bin with the bedding is you could seed it with a few of the worms from the bottom bin, just so that you have some worms right away eating your food waste. And that top bin will be exclusively where I put my food scraps. And eventually, all the guys down here in that first bin, they're going to realize once the food's gone, they're going to start moving around and looking for new food, so they'll crawl up the holes in the bottom into the new bin. But it's a good idea to maybe seed it a little bit with some of the worms from the bottom first. And then, once you feel like all the worms have moved up into the top bin, you can take the bottom bin and harvest your compost. Yeah. And you might want to sift through the compost a little bit, because sometimes there'll be some weird scraps that just don't decompose. I made a sifter, I forgot to bring it, out of hardware cloth, and it's just like a little tray about 6 inches deep, and you can just shake it out. That way.
You're mining for poop.
Mining for poop, yes, yes, mining for poop. And if your poop is a little bit too mushy to use right away, like I said, you can mix it with a little peat moss, and it's just perfectly fine. And again, I save it for my special crops like my strawberries, my asparagus, things that are heavy feeders, but you can use it on house plants. You can use it on anything, really.
So you only have one bin of worms at home?
Yes.
And I've seen your garden, it's huge.
Yeah.
So you only use this special poop?
For the special stuff. The stuff I really want to baby a little bit, because it's only around for a little while, like the strawberries and the asparagus only, are available for a few weeks a year. So, but I've top dressed plants that I transplanted as a little extra, oomph when they go in the ground. And, yeah. And the rain breaks it down into the soil, so it works really well. So that's the poop on how to make worm poop. And our website has very, very thorough instructions on it, and a nice little chart that has good foods to put in here and bad foods to put in here, so in case you didn't catch all that the first time, you can download and print them out.
What's your website address?
indianlake.sals.edu.
Thank you very much. This is great.
Oh yeah, no worries.